そろそろ始めます。Now we'll start the last session of today. On the whole, the speaker is Nusco, the author of the Ruby Metaprogramming. So, let's start your presentation.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Am I speaking too loud? Okay. Welcome, everybody. So I want to talk about an important feeling today. I want to talk about love. And you know love stories. You know how they begin. At the beginning, everything is absolutely perfect and fantastic. And after a while, you start seeing problems. And that's where you really have to deal with the problems, or else the story is over. And this is the story of me falling in love with Ruby. So at the beginning, it was absolutely fantastic. I was coming from Java. So by comparison, I say it is a language that is easy and yet powerful. And I feel immediately productive. Everything looks so clean. So at the beginning, this is me learning Ruby. I'm this happy little coder, and I start feeling confident that I can actually write code in this language. And so after just a few days, I say, okay, I'm a Ruby programmer now. I look at my code, and it actually looks very much like Java in Ruby. But I think, okay, I will look at the code of somebody who's better than me at this. I will look at some state-of-the-art library, and I can pick up the style and tricks. So I decide to look at active record, because everybody is telling me that Rails is state-of-the-art. And I didn't know what I was getting into, really. So once I start looking into that, what I see is this active record base class. If you ever used Rails, you know about this class. It's pretty important. And right after this class, what I see is this code. Base class eval extend. Now I'm starting. This stuff I don't really understand. What's class eval? What's extend? I look into the documentation for extend, and I still don't get it. OK, I can probably skip it for now. OK. I don't get it, it's not that important, but I can go on with the stuff that I do understand, like include. I get it. It's a module, right? A mixin, this is easy. I can look into the validations module. So I go into validations, and I look at it. Oh God, this is even worse. Now here is the stuff that I don't understand. That class eval stuff again, and the extend again, and self-included, pardon. And base.send, I kind of know about send, but why did I use send here? I don't get it. So my confidence is starting to fade, but I'm still in love, so I don't give up. I can look into the stuff that I understand, like ls method chain. This is a method call, of course. So I can just go and look for this method. This was Rails 2. They don't even have it in Rails 3. And so I go around and look for alias method chain, and I cannot find it anywhere. It's not anywhere. I cannot, it's ridiculous. When you have all these methods in Rails, and you look around, you cannot find where the methods are defined. You never have that problem with Java. And then I have to do a text search of all things, and I finally find the damn method. It's here. In active support, God knows how it got there. Right? And I look at the method for like a minute, maybe more like 5 minutes. And here are the lines I don't understand. And at this point, my brain explodes. It's pretty clear by now that this language is not nearly as easy and harmless as I thought. There is some stuff going on under the surface that is just too much for me. I don't get it. So I start looking on the internet. I start reading blogs. I find stuff from a Nola Bini guy and another guy who who calls himself a white lucky stiff, and they talk about metaprogramming. I start reading these techniques, and they are incredible. They look like magic. You know what Arthur Clarke said? If you have a technology and it's too much for you, you don't get it. It looks like magic. So I have this information, but it's spread or scattered all around. So what I decide to do is I will just write a document, and I will put every single trick that I find into this document. And because these tricks look like magic spells to me, I call this document a spell book. And the idea is actually, it sounds strange. It's actually simple. I just look for examples, for snippets of code, minimal, and I give them names. Like this is very basic. It's not even meta, but people are using it all the time. When you define a module, sometimes you define the module because you want to include that module somewhere. It's a mix-in at heart. Some other times, you just want to use the module as a container for more modules, classes. And in this case, for example, module my is not meant to be included. It's just a container for class array. So then you have my array, and it doesn't clash with the standard library array. And I call this a namespace. Ruby doesn't have any specific facility for namespaces. This is just a regular module, but when I see a module used this way, I don't have to say, oh, I get it. It's not a mix-in. It's meant to be a container. I can just say, hey, it's a namespace. And another example, only slightly more difficult, but you know about it, chances are. When I use the class keyword, sometimes I want to define a class. Some other times, I want to open a class that is already defined, as in this case, I want to change it, string. And when I do that, I call it an open class. I'm just reopening an existing class. And yet another example, this is only slightly more complicated. I can call a method by saying obj.name of the method. But I can also call a method by saying obj.send the name of the method. And this is more flexible because, thank you, Cozy. Because if you do that, you can, for example, calculate the name of the method. Or you can call a method that's private, because send doesn't honor privacy. You can say, I don't care, it's private. I want to call it anyway. Okay? And you can call this a dynamic dispatch, because you're dispatching a message dynamically. I could go on like this, but actually, if I want to give you a list of spells so that we can go back to the Rails source and understand it, we have to go deeper. We have to go into the reason why these spells work. And this means that we have to look into the way that Ruby organizes objects and classes and modules, and that's called the Ruby object model. I won't say everything about this. I will just say some important things that are essential to understand the spells, but it's still a lot of information. So I'm sorry, now I'm getting into a long train ride of information about the Ruby object model. I split it into 3 parts to make it more manageable. So this is part 1, the basics of the Ruby object model. And I will introduce a few spells along the way. So this is the first example. We have a duck class. And duck defines a couple of instance variables, age and weight, and also a couple of methods, walk and quack. And we have an object, Donald, of class duck. Now imagine freezing everything. You raise the hood, you look in memory. What do you see? What you see is, first, Donald, the object. And if you look inside the object, you see instance variables, age and weight. It's just a map, basically, key value, or rather, key reference to value. And also, in the object, you will see a link to the class. Okay? That's all there is in the object. There is nothing else. Okay, there are a few flags, low-level stuff, but mostly this is what an object looks like. So where are the methods? Where are the methods? If you look in memory, you won't find the methods in the object. The methods are actually in the class, which makes sense because if you have multiple ducks, they share the same class, so they all share the same methods. It wouldn't make sense for each duck to contain its own methods. So instance variables are in objects, methods are in classes. What happens when a client comes up and calls Donald.quack? At this point, Ruby goes straight to the receiver, Donald, the object that you call the method upon. But it doesn't look for the methods there, because Ruby knows the methods are not there. It skips straight to the right, one step to the right, and there it finds the method and executes the method. This is called method lookup. Okay? This is the basic case. Slightly more complicated. What if method quack is not there? What if the method is in, say, in a superclass? Let's make it more complicated. Now duck is a bird, and bird has a method fly. You can draw it like this. You have Donald, the class of Donald, duck, and the superclass of duck, bird. Then you can call Donald.fly, and Ruby will go to the receiver, one step right, no method fly there, one step up, there it is, and it calls it, okay? And if it's not there, there are other superclasses. There is object and basic object if you're using Ruby 1.9, and so on. Okay, slightly more complicated, one step at a time, modules. Now, bird includes a module noisy, which has a method make noise. What happens at this point? How can you call that method? What happens is that when bird includes noisy, Ruby takes the module and it slips it into the chain right above the class that includes the module. Can you picture that? So now, when you call Donald make noise, it's the same process. Receiver, one step to the right, and up until it finds the method. So this is how method lookup works in Ruby. It's one step to the right, and then up until you find the method. Or if you don't, you get into basic object, it's not there, then you get an error. There are no exceptions. It's as simple as that. There is also another possibility. We can ask, if you are in doubt, it's not always easy to draw this chain of ancestors. So we can ask to the class itself. We can say, hey, duck, give me your ancestors. And it will give you an array that contains, in this case, duck, bird, noisy, object, then a module named kernel, because object includes kernel, and then basic object. There is one last wrinkle about method lookup. Once Ruby finds the method, it also has to execute the method. Sometimes, though, the method references some instance variable, like weight. What object does that variable belong to? Well, if you look at the chain, okay, it's clearly an instance variable of Donald, the receiver. But by the time Ruby has gone one step right and then up into the method, it may forget who the receiver was. It's not in the receiver anymore. So, just not to forget, as soon as you call the method, Ruby stores the receiver in a special variable. That's called a self. So as soon as you call the method, the receiver becomes self. And then Ruby goes one step right, then up, it finds the method, and it executes the method with the receiver as self. And every instance variable in the method is an instance variable of the receiver. Every method you call without an explicit receiver is called on self, the receiver, okay? So far, so good. There is also an interesting spell around here. Sometimes you want to change self because you want to execute some code with a special particular object as self, but you cannot just assign self. You cannot say self equals obj. It's a read-only variable. There is another trick that allows you to change self. You can call this method that's called instance eval, and that method will change self and execute the code in the block with self as obj. So in this case, we are accessing a private instance variable of obj. This is called a context probe because it's like a little probe that you put inside the context to do stuff in there. Okay? Let's set it aside. It will come useful later. This is the wrap-up of part 1. Everything you need to know about the way that Ruby calls and executes methods. When you call a method, Ruby goes from the receiver one step right and then up the chain of ancestors until it finds the method. And then it executes the method with the receiver as self. That's all. Okay? Mumble. Okay, great. Now let's talk about classes. Because we have been talking about objects a lot. But we said this is how Ruby calls methods. So what about class methods? Those must be different, right? Actually, if you look at a class method, look at these two calls. You have Donald.quack and duck.ancestors. One is a regular method, the other is a class method. And they look pretty similar, which is no surprise because they are exactly the same thing. Because a class is just an object in Ruby. So when you call a class method, you are actually calling a method on an object that happens to be a class. Sure, in the first case, you have Donald with a lowercase d, and in the second case, you have duck with an uppercase d. And the reason is that duck is not a variable, it's a constant. Class names are constants. Ruby is trying to prevent you from saying array equals string. That would be kind of messy. But apart from that, it's just a regular method. How does lookup work when you say duck.ancestors? Duck is just an object, and Ruby goes into the receiver object, and then one step right into the class of the object. What is the class of duck? Yeah, it's a class, so its class is class. It's an object of class. It's getting interesting. And it looks for the method ancestors, and surprise, it's not there. Ancestors is not in class, so what does Ruby do? It goes one step up into the superclass of class. Module. A class is just a module, anyway. And there it finds the method ancestors, and it executes the method. So it's exactly the same mechanism for objects, any object, including classes. We also said that we have instance eval. If a class is an object, you can call instance eval on a class, and the class becomes self. Why not? You also have another option. There is another method that's specific to classes, or rather modules, that's called class eval. And it does the same thing. Duck becomes self, and it executes any block that you pass to the method with duck as self. What's the difference? There are differences. I'm not going into that. For now, just use whatever communicates your intention best, whatever is more explicit. If you have a class, you have the choice. If you have an object, you have to use instance eval. Okay? And one last wrinkle about classes. When you have code inside a class, that code is executed inside the class definition, just like any regular code. So when you say superclass, Ruby calls superclass. And who's the receiver here? Inside the class definition, as it turns out, self is the class. So saying superclass here is exactly the same as writing duck.superclass. Nothing else to it. So you get bird. This is the basis of a common spell that's called a class macro. A class macro is just a class method. Here, for example, we have self my macro. But instead of calling it like c.myMacro, you call it within the definition of the class or a subclass. Okay? Think of the attribute readers, attribute writers. Think of the validation methods in Rails. They are just meant to be used this way. Other than that, they are just class methods. Are you still with me, gentlemen? Because I have to ask you now for your full attention, because this is part 3 and this is going to get ugly. We are going into the darkest recesses of Ruby, where strange creatures lie. I could go on like this for the entire day. I love it. And in particular, the creature that I want to talk about is hiding from you. It doesn't want to be seen. It's like a ghost. And this ghost is called an eigenclass. So there you have it, part 3 about eigenclasses. This is short, but a little bit complex. And then we get back to Rails, promise. There is one spell in Ruby that's called a singleton method. And it never fails to impress newcomers to Ruby, like I was. And the idea of a singleton method is that you define a method on a single object, not on a class, not on a bunch of objects, on just one single object. In this case, Donald has a method dance, and you can call Donald.dance. No other object has that method, not even other ducks. It's a specific method of Donald. So now you can wonder, where does the method dance live? I just said many, many times that Ruby goes one step right, then up. So where is that method? It cannot be in duck, because if it's in duck, then any duck would get the method dance. What happens is that Ruby is cheating. There is something in here that you cannot see. There is an invisible class. And this invisible class gets right to the bottom of the chain. And this invisible class doesn't even have a name. I just call it Sharp Donald, for lack of a better name. And that's where dance is. So when you call Donald.dance, what did I do? Sorry. It was just for suspense. When you call, when you call Donald.dance, Ruby goes one step to the right. There it is. And that invisible class is called, sometimes they call it the singleton class. Some people call it the meta class, the ghost class. I call it the eigen class just because. Eigen is a German word that means an object own class. I remember that Matt said, I like eigenclass, and I've been calling it eigenclass. I think that Matt changed his mind, but so that's where singleton methods live, in eigenclasses. Here it is. But we said once again that anything that is true of objects is also true of classes, because classes are objects. So it must be possible to define a singleton method of a class. Which is actually easy, even easier. You don't even need to have Donald. You can just say def duck.family, and that's a singleton method. Right? And in this case, it will return the family of ducks in Latin, Anatide. If you walk out of this conference with one piece of useful information, that's it. And then you can call duck.family. And it works exactly the same as before. You have duck, and you have the eigenclass of duck that contains family. Duck.family, okay, receiver one step right. You probably know about this stuff, actually, because, okay, you see it like this, but usually you don't write a definition like that outside the class. So usually you write it inside the class. And because inside the class itself, duck, is self, you can also write it like this. Wait a minute, this is just a class method, right? So we did a very long turnaround. And here is what we found. A class method is just a singleton method of a class. It's living in the class's eigenclass. That's why singleton methods exist, I think. I would have to ask maths. They are just there so that we can have class methods. So this has been pretty complicated, but now I have a quiz for you, because we are at the end of our discussion of the Ruby object model. And here is the quiz. I'm asking you because I wondered about it when I was learning Ruby, and I see that many people ask about it on forums and so on. And this is the problem. I have a module, and this module defines a method, talk about. And I have a class, and I want this method to become a class method. I want to be able to call duck talk about. How do I do that? Instance eval is one suggestion. That's pretty warped.
You have to add it to the class's eigenclass.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Oh, well, what an anticlimax. Okay. Well, I was hoping that somebody would suggest what I tried. I just tried to include the module. But of course, that's not going to work, because then the method becomes an instance method, not a class method. So when I can say Donald talk about, but when I say duck talk about, I get a no method error. What we really want to do is this. That's the class, that's the eigenclass of the class, and we want to include the module in the eigenclass of the class. That's crazy. Why do we want to do that? Well, because then we can say duck talk about, and Ruby will go one step right and then up, and it will find it. It has to find it. So how do we include a module in the eigenclass? There are many ways to do that, but there is one very, very quick way to do it. And that's using a method that's named extend. That's what it does. Extend means I want to include the module. No, wait. I don't want to include the module. Yeah, I want to include it, but not in this class. I want to include it in the eigenclass of this class. So this is the way that you can get a method into the eigenclass of a class so that it becomes a class method, and then you can say duck talk about. Pretty twisted, I know. But that's what Rails does all the time. So this is what I needed to understand this stuff. This is the spell, class extension. exactly the same code as before. You include the module in the eigenclass of a class with extend. There are also other ways. Okay, we are over time. I have to run a bit. I will fire 2 more spells at you, and then it's back at Rails. Spell 1, hook method. This is strange. We have seen that we have the object model. There are many things happening in there, and this is like an event in the object model. When some things happen, Ruby will call some special methods. Like self-inherited, Ruby calls it every time you subclass the class. So we subclass the class 3 times every time Ruby calls inherited. And we just add the class to a global array. And finally, last spell, let's put together class extensions and hook methods, and we get a pretty crazy spell that's called the class extension mixin. I know that the name sucks. I struggled to find a better name. I couldn't. If you can think of a better name, by all means, tell me. And this is it. You have a module. You include that module, and the module has a hook method included. So when you include this module, Ruby calls included, and the module turns around to the class that just included it and extends that class with more class methods. So you gain both instance methods and class methods with a single call to include. I know that this is complicated, but again, Rails is doing it all the time. Let's go back to Rails, armed with all these spells. And if you go back to the Rails source, you will see what's in there. Class base and blah, blah, blah. And then base class eval. What's class eval? It's a context probe. And up there, we just have a namespace, of course, and here we have a context probe. Basically, we are executing all this code inside class base. This is exactly the same as writing class base again, only it's more explicit, because we are saying, look, we are not defining a class. We're just opening a class that already exists. So it's also an open class in a way. And it adds class methods. It's a class extension. And then it includes a lot of modules, and each one of these modules is pretty complicated, but if you just look at this code, self-included base extend, this is a hook method plus a class extension. Wait a minute, this is a class extension mixing. So what it does is when you include validations, it defines both instance methods like valid here and class methods like validate length hop. You get the complete package of functionality, both class methods and instance methods. And validates length of, anyway, it's a class marker. And also, there is a send here that includes another module. It's a dynamic dispatch. Why did they use send here? Oh, well, just because include is private. They didn't want to reopen the class. They just cut to privacy. And then class eval again, and that's yet another context probe that calls alias method chain, and those are also class markers. So now I can kind of understand what's happening in the Rails source code. And now the question, may I have another 5 minutes?
No problem. You have 25 minutes remain.
25 minutes? Okay, may I just spend 20 minutes doing nothing? Okay. Okay, let's go back to let's go back to the why. I showed you a lot of stuff, a lot of information. I don't think you can retain all this stuff if you didn't know about it. And you can ask yourself, okay, what do I care? Why should I learn all this craziness?
No, sorry about that. You don't have it.
Hey, now you're taking them back.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And the main reason why I think that you should really learn this stuff is that, look back at the Rails source. I'm finishing in 3 minutes. I'm a slow mofo. Here you have a base class. And in the base class, there are a lot of method definitions. instance methods and class methods. And then we are reopening the class, and we are including loads of modules. And these modules, in turn, define more methods and more class methods. And they also include more modules. So in the end, there are a huge amount of modules that all get into the same class. Do I have 2 minutes?
Yeah. You have 25 minutes.
You are confusing me.
That's a magic spell.
Yeah. I'm the one who's supposed to be confusing here. Okay. Sorry. So, what happens with Rails, if you look at it, is that it defines a base class. And then it starts dumping methods inside this class. And this class is growing and growing. It's getting huge. How large is the base class in the end? So I wondered, how large is the base class? I went to Rails 3. This is from Rails 2. In Rails 3, they are using slightly different techniques. But I went to Rails 3, and I asked it, how many ancestors does active record base have? 42. Okay, how many methods? I'm taking bets. How many instance methods does active record base have, roughly? Good. Do you have IRB open? It's 240 in Rails 3. 240 methods. And how many class methods? This totally shocked me. Of course, this is crazy. This cannot possibly work. Nobody in their right mind would make a class with an interface of 700 methods. Is there anybody from the Rails core team in the room? I'm glad they're not here. I have to tell you, they are totally nuts. This can't work. I was coming from Java. Imagine going to a meeting of Java programmers and say, okay, guys, I'm using a library. It's pretty interesting. It has an interesting design. It's quite large. And the entire library is basic one huge class with like thousands of methods. They would think I'm crazy. They would call the police. This can't be true. This is unmaintainable. And yet, it is very maintainable, isn't it? Hundreds or thousands of contributors evolving this library all the time, hammering at it all the time. And the library is evolving so fast that nobody wants to write books about Rails and active record, because by the time you finish one chapter, it's obsolete. That's how fast it's changing. And it's still stable. Okay, they had their own share of bugs recently, but it's still pretty stable. So the lesson here, when I realized this, I was, wow. The lesson is that whatever works in Java doesn't necessarily work in Ruby. You just have to forget what you learned in other languages. If I were a Java coder, I have to solve this problem of building functionality. What do? I look for a dependency injection framework, maybe. The Rails guys just threw a few spells at it. There you have it. Modules, one huge class. They solve the problem their own way. And Ruby is meant to be used like this. The language is actually begging to be used like this. So this is why you should probably learn these techniques, however crazy they may look. Because in the end, this is not a bolt-on power feature that you can choose to ignore. This is just a Ruby. This is the Ruby language. It's made to be used like this. It's a deep language. Sure, you can stay close to the surface. You can choose not to dive in, and that's comfortable. But if you do dive in, there are many interesting things happening. Sure, there are dangers in there, but there are also treasures to be found. And if you find all these treasures, you understand the techniques. When I did, I looked back at the spell book, and suddenly it's not magic anymore. Now I know the technology. It's just a book. The book of Ruby, if you wish. You probably want to be able to read it. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Of course, we have lots of time for questions.
Hey,
So-
one more thing.
Okay,
Buy this book.
I have one.
Or if you wish, we have the Japanese translation. Thank you, Satoshi Asakawa, for being a great reviewer. Thank you, Kado Mazanori, for translating this book. It's your book as much as mine. And if you just want the spells, 34 spells, that's short, you can download them for free from the book site, of course, so you don't have to buy the book. The book contains all the explanations and so on. This is the information, questions.
Okay, so let's take some questions. 日本語で OK です。日本語でもどうぞどうぞ。なぜならあと20分もあるのですね、これ。We have 20 minutes. So, let's start conversation. Oh.
What is your favorite metaprogramming trick?
Difficult to say, but I think that method missing, which I didn't describe here, in itself it's nothing special, but it can be used to do very nice things.
Wait, really? Okay.
It's not dirty. I mean, for example, you can use method missing to, if you get into very complicated stuff with that, then you're probably going to be sorry. But sometimes you can just pick a method, change it, tweak it, send it to another object, and you have a dynamic proxy. That makes sense.
I was just always taught to sort of to use method missing as a method of last resort. Maybe define a method on the fly, or do anything you can before you use method missing. How do you feel about that?
Did you ever look into the Rails source code for the method missing?
Just because it's in the Rails source code.
It's when I looked at that, and I looked at the method missing in active record base, that's pretty scary. That goes far beyond what I would be comfortable doing. It's actually quite crazy. It evaluates a huge string of code. It does really complicated stuff. But in many cases, method missing ideally is just a few lines of code, 4 or 5 lines. And when you do that, it can be extremely flexible. I miss it when I code with static languages, at least. Anyway, I'm not an authority on which one is best. Mm-hmm. Your mileage may vary.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. You said in the very beginning you were looking for Rails 2 related internals, and then you also said you also look into Rails 3. When you look at the source code of Rails in terms of a metaprogramming perspective, are there any changes or trend of the patterns they heavily uses?
I'm not really current on the code base of Rails. I just checked what they're doing with Rails 3. A few things I know. They are changing it all the time. I mean, this is, for example, they're not using alias method chain anymore. Also, they're not using class extension mixins as much as they used to. Now they have more modules, sorry, and they are more specialized. So that's changing all the time. I think if you look at this is, I cannot vouch for them, but I think this is just the result of a process. It evolved. It wasn't born like this, because if you look at the result, it's pretty crazy. Who would have thought? And they probably didn't think about it. It just kept changing and changing until they arrived to this situation. And this was Rails 2. I can say it's definitely still evolving. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions? Questions about spells or love?
I have a kind of general question. Like typical programming approach and like metaprogramming are slightly different, especially like if you use like lots of like eval and like people mentioned method missing. And any advice on like debugging? Because sometimes it becomes kind of tricky where the stuff goes and how it is being called and so on, especially like if you use complex eval statements.
Again, I can only speak for myself. What I see is that metaprogramming in Ruby in particular is not really different. It's just programming. Granted, it's programming with strange techniques that look a bit out there, but it's still writing code. So every rule that applies to code applies to metaprogramming code as well. And one of my first rules is everything should be tested. And if you can't test it easily, then it's probably not good code. So if you are using these techniques a lot, and maybe you write huge evals, and you have trouble testing them, you should step back and say, I cannot test it. Maybe it's not decoupled enough. It's too messy. Maybe I should do something else instead. I wouldn't draw a hard line. Now we step into metaprogramming territory. Don't get there, or only get there with weapons, or you need different techniques to deal with metaprogramming. It's still code. It's either readable or unreadable, either good or bad. So all the usual advice of coding applies to me. Just my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
What is the big advantage of having a single class with 700?
Sorry, I can't
Hey,
spot. Oh, sorry.
With having a single class with 700 methods.
What's the question again?
What is the advantage of having a single class with 700 methods?
Actually, you should ask to the Rails guys. I can guess. And my guess is that it's not an advantage as much as a side effect. The advantage is using modules. And the reason why modules are so good is that they are extremely decoupled. For example, you have a module containing validations. You can easily use that module in isolation. You can take that module and test it, for example, in isolation. You can just include it. You define a couple of methods that the module relies upon, and you use it or test it. So you have all these moving pieces that are very decoupled, and then you put all the pieces together, and everything probably still works. You cannot do that with superclasses, for example, because if you extract a class from a hierarchy, you are getting the entire hierarchy as a result. You cannot decouple them as easily. So the point here was that modules are good, they are very flexible, and if you do everything with modules, as a side effect, you can get a huge class that is an assembly of tens of modules. But that's just a side effect.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you
kind of answered what my question was going to be, but basically in your example of the Rails base class with all these different modules in there, what's kind of a good strategy for determining how a class should be broken up into these modules, and when should you use that?
I see modules as packages of functionality. For example, validation, that's something that belongs together. A method that validates the length of a field, a method that validates, for example, the existence of a field, kind of belong together. That's pretty much the same feature. So it comes natural to say, hey, they must belong to the same module. And of course, it's evolving. So at one point you say, no, I got it wrong. They don't belong to the same module. That's two different modules. You split them. Refactoring is implicit in this. You are always supposed to refactor, even with metaprogramming, even the more so. So you just find out, your tests will probably guide you towards the right way of decoupling.
Okay, so should you use these multiple modules if they're only ever going to be used in this base class? Like, I kind of get the idea of in Rails 3 having it so you can use these validations in something totally unrelated to active record. But at the same time, I've seen people doing classes where they've been breaking up the classes into these modules, and at the same time there's a certain degree of coupling between these modules in that they probably only make sense ever to be used in this one base class.
If your module is well decoupled, like any other piece of code, it will be easy to use it on its own. The proof of the pudding is in using that module on its own. And if you realize, as the Rails guys apparently did, I cannot vouch for that, if you realize that the module is not easy to use in isolation, you probably go in and do something about it. And that's why they redesigned active support for sure, and active record in part, because they wanted it to be more decoupled. I don't think I'm answering your question, actually. I'm not sure I got the question.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
Yeah, is it? Luck. Thank you.
Next. So, any other question? No. ないでしょうか? Any other questions? Okay.
Is it okay to ask a question that's not relevant to this topic at all? I must say I find your English absolutely amazing. And your choice of words, even for a native speaker, is particularly applaudable. And you have very strong Italian accent, and it's just wonderfully beautiful.
It's part of my charm. Thank you.
I was just wondering where you picked up such a grand vocabulary.
I do this for work. I mean, I write stuff and I read an awful lot, so thank you very much. All I know is that my English-speaking friends, especially the Brits, they are pulling my leg all the time for my accent and my creative use of their language. So thank you very much. This is very much appreciated. Living on the internet is probably going to teach you languages. Thanks.
Okay. Any others?
Writing the metaprogramming book, did you focus on 1.8 or 1.9, and how did that choice affect how you wrote the book?
I focused on 1.8 because I started writing the book when 1.9 was still in beta. And I figured, okay, within a year, I will be done. And after 3 years of writing the damn book, I said, I probably have to update it to 1.9. So it's focusing on 1.9 mainly. I stressed the stuff that is 1.8 only. And I'm glad that it didn't take 3 more years, or else it would be 2.0 apparently. I will try to update it when Maths comes out with 2.0. You're welcome.
So I have a question. And do you recommend ordinary Ruby programmers to use the metaprogramming?
I would recommend any Ruby programmer to learn about metaprogramming. You are bound to get in touch with this stuff, like I did, even if you don't intend to. You look into the source code of some library, and you go, wow, what's this? And when the book was out, some people on Slashdot, you know Slashdoters, some people were saying, I wouldn't let my teammates get close to this book. This stuff is dangerous. Well, okay, it's powerful, so it's dangerous. You can shoot your own foot, for sure. But I don't understand this point, that something is dangerous, so I'm not going to look at it. If it's dangerous, I want to know everything about it. Ignorance is never an answer to any problem. What problems does it solve? So I say, if you do Ruby on a professional basis, you probably should know about this stuff. You don't have to buy the book. You can just read on the internet or read wise stuff, and you will know just enough. Using it when you're feeling confident, like any technique, and write unit tests.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I will close this session. So thank you.
Thank you very much.